It's had plenty of updates, and yet, for a huge part of the player base, the feeling is still the same. The game might be newer, more advanced, better looking, but for a lot of players, it still doesn't give the same feeling CSGO gave. Not the same control, not the same clarity, and not the same sense that the game responds exactly the way you expect it to. I'm Dale, and in this video, we're breaking down why CS2 still feels worse than GO for so many players, why the screen feels more tiring, why the gunplay feels less readable, what changed in the feedback between you and the game, and why GO still feels drier but more honest to so many people. Let's get into it. The first reason CS2 still feels worse than GO for a lot of players is the screen itself. Not because the graphics are bad. In fact, it's the opposite. CS2 is visually richer. More lighting, more volume, more effects, more movement inside the image. And that's where the problem starts. Counter-Strike is a game of tiny reads, the edge of a model, the start of a peak, movement inside smoke, a slight shift in position. When the image becomes too busy, your brain spends more energy filtering noise instead of making decisions. That's the big difference. GO felt drier. It wasn't trying to impress you, it was just showing you the situation. CS2 often looks more alive, but because of that, it can also feel more tiring. More shake, more visual response, more of that feeling that the screen is constantly presenting something to you. And that can feel good for a round or two. But over a longer session, the downside shows up. The game doesn't necessarily become harder mechanically, it becomes harder to process. That's why a lot of players don't say CS2 is bad, they say CS2 is tiring, and that's a huge difference. While CS2 keeps making people question how the game is supposed to feel, GGDROP keeps it simple. Promo code GYVSD gives you an extra 11% on your top-up and a free wheel spin. So you add funds, get bonus value on top, and another shot at a solid drop. The second reason is gunplay, and this is where we need to avoid the lazy take of CS2 shooting is just bad. That's not really the point. The point is that it feels different. A huge part of the player base built years of muscle memory in GO. Not just aim, an entire system of feel. How the first bullet feels, how a spray settles, when to stop, when to commit, how distance reads, how the timing of a duel feels in your hands. And in CS2, that system started breaking for a lot of people. Not because players suddenly forgot how to shoot, but because the game started responding a little differently to the same actions. Sometimes the tempo feels different. Sometimes the stopping moment reads differently. Sometimes the gunplay feels heavier. Sometimes it feels too sharp. And that creates a really frustrating feeling. Your hands are doing what used to work, but your brain isn't getting the result it expects. That's why a lot of players don't say, "I got worse." They say, "I don't feel the weapon." And honestly, that's one of the most accurate criticisms of CS2. Because in Counter-Strike, shooting isn't only a mechanic. It's trust in how the game answers your input. The third reason is feedback, meaning the way the game tells you what just happened. You clicked, you hit, you killed, or you didn't. And in a good competitive game, the link between those moments needs to feel extremely clear. For a lot of players, GO handled that in a simpler way. Drier, harsher, but clearer. In CS2, some players describe a weird sense of disconnect. Not necessarily a technical one, a sensory one. You hit, but it doesn't fully feel like a hit. You die, but your brain hasn't fully processed it yet. You deal damage, but the screen and the sound don't combine into one clean signal. And that's where frustration starts. Not because the game is always wrong, but because it explains the result less clearly. Sometimes the sound doesn't hit with the same force. Sometimes the animation and visual response don't land as one moment. Sometimes the kill itself feels less dry, and because of that, less readable. And in a game like Counter-Strike, that matters a lot. CS runs on micro-trust. I made an action. The game immediately and clearly told me what happened. If that link gets weaker, players start feeling uncertainty, and uncertainty in Counter-Strike kills enjoyment faster than almost any balance change. And this is where we get to the hardest truth for CS2. CSGO was not necessarily perfect. But for a huge number of players, it felt more honest. Not because everything worked flawlessly, but because the game was drier, less visual noise, less cinematic presentation, less of that feeling that the game wanted to impress you. GO delivered the moment in a faster, harsher, cleaner way. There's the enemy, there's the shot, there's the hit. There's the result. The connection between your action and the outcome felt shorter. In CS2, that connection often feels like it has more layers in between. Beautiful layers, modern layers, technical layers, but still layers. And for some players, that's exactly what breaks the feeling of honesty. Not in the sense that the game is literally cheating them, but in the sense that it does a worse job of communicating one simple thing. I did the right thing, and I got a clear result. That's why GO still feels, for many people, like more than just an old habit. It feels like a more transparent version of Counter-Strike. Less beautiful, less modern, but more direct. CS2 is more modern in many ways. Better looking, more alive, more advanced. But player comfort in Counter-Strike is not built on technology alone. It's built on clarity. How quickly and cleanly you read the screen. How naturally you feel the weapon. How clearly the game tells you the result of every action. And that's exactly where GO still wins for a lot of people. Not in scale, not in graphics, not in spectacle, but in the simplicity of the connection between you and the game. So when people say CS2 still feels worse than GO, they're often not talking about numbers. They're talking about trust. That feeling that the game is in your hands, instead of you having to relearn how it feels every time you queue up. I'm Dale. If you want, next episode we can break down one specific part of this even deeper. Why CS2 feels more visually tiring, and what exactly in the image design frustrates players the most. For now, that's it. Wishing you nothing but absolute banger games.